With the dawn of atomic weapons, I think for the first time, man has begun to realize that major war really won't pay off. The last war that really paid off may have been the Franco-Prussian War. It was quick. Germany collected 2 provinces and a good deal of war booty. I suspect the Franco-Prussian War was a profitable war. I don't think the Spanish-American War was profitable. We had headaches in Cuba, headaches in the Philippines. Maybe Puerto Rico may turn out to be a net profit on the ledger of that war. Maybe the Philippines. Cuba certainly is a question mark today. I don't think this Blue Book is any guarantee that the human race won't blow a considerable fraction of its population to kingdom come. As that rather macabre song goes, when the air becomes Uranus, we will all go simultaneous, you know. Or have you heard Tom Lehrer? How does it go? You can sing that old Te Deum when you see that ICBM, and we'll all go together when we go home. I played that over the other day, and a bunch of college kids that dropped in on us, and you know, they didn't think that song was near as funny as we thought a year or so ago. I don't think this book is any guarantee to us or to anyone else that we're going to make it intact in the next century. The thing I don't know is this: has mankind learned that war is unprofitable? If we've learned that lesson, then we're not going to have major war. If we have that lesson to learn, then the evolutionary process will ensure that we will go to school for the next installment. I don't think the possession of this Blue Book in any way guarantees the integrity of Oklahoma City or the city of Chicago. And I'm awfully glad that the Reserve Store of Books is located in a little town in Indiana called Crawfordsville. It just happens to be there because that's where Donnelly has one of their presses, and that's where this book was printed. And I think Crawfordsville has a pretty good chance of escaping any Holocaust. Now, this book is all over the world. It's in the Antipodes. It's in South Africa. It's in India. There'll be a French edition that will soon start its way, making its way around the world. And I would say in terms of an international language, French is probably the second best language, second only to English. If a person has been exposed to Occidental education and doesn't speak English, odds are he speaks French. I would rate Spanish as the third. So this book soon will begin to operate in 2 languages. I think this book is going to operate to influence civilization through people. Let's say that 2 Urantians who have listened, who have read what Jesus said to the rich man in Rome and believe this. Let's say that one owns a business and the other represents a union. Each of these men could bargain shrewdly for his position. But back of all their bargaining would be a common philosophy, which would make for an easier meeting of the minds on the grounds of fairness. That is the influence the Urantia book is going to have in every walk of life. The minute a capitalist comes to the awareness that he does not own all that he controls, then his feeling of proprietorship comes to be tempered with a feeling of trusteeship. It's a peculiar amalgam. I know this feeling. I understand this feeling thoroughly. I once owned a business, lock, stock, and barrel. But I never treated it as a proprietorship. I always treated it as a trusteeship. That was not mine to venture in a card game. As I would cheerfully play poker for pocket money. This is mine. The odds and ends in my pocket. We'll shoot craps for this if you want it. That's my feeling. This book is not going to do anything spectacular in the sense of stopping anything or starting anything. But it's going to quietly, like a thief in the night, come upon mankind. And I think the whole human race is going to wake up to the fact the darn thing is here 3 generations from now. I shan't see it. You shan't see it. But if your grandchildren live to a ripe age, they might. Your children won't see it either. But your grandchildren might. My great-grandchildren may. How does that idea appeal to you?
Sounds very logical.
But I don't think this means we should not, each in our way, be diligent. Not frenzied, but not like a daisical plea. In order for this book to be where we forecast, many, many little people like us, are going to have to do little jobs. I've often thought, I'm only one man. But by heavens, I am one man. And I can do what one man can do. And this I shall do. Some people don't have the capacity to sell this book. I don't think the Alpheus twins had the capacity to preach the gospel. And I don't see that Jesus thought one whit the less of them because they couldn't. But I think if Peter had failed him, he would have been a great disappointment. I know lots of people that... I know a gal, she's a very fine girl. She's a very brilliant woman. She is the antithesis of a sales type. I think the only person that she's ever likely to sell this book to is her son. And there it will be by example rather than by persuasion. She just is not the missionary type. She's a very shy person. I would be amazed if she would ever come to me and say, Bill, I have a candidate for the Blue Book. But she believes it. And because of her, her son believes it. I think she's done well. But I know some fellows like Ed Jones, hell, if he doesn't sell it, he's wasting his time, because there's a salesman. Do you see the difference? This has nothing to do with the quality of the person. This has a lot to do with human aptitude. Some people can sell, other people do not sell too well.
Or whether it's by example or salesmanship, the result.
Yes, yes. If the best you can do in life is to benefit from this book, I think you've done well. If the best you can do is to give it to one sister, one mother, one brother, one child, if that's your best, gee whiz, who can ask for more than your best? But if you have the capacity to give it to more, please use that capacity. Do what you can do. I see no place for frenzy, and I see no place for sloth. You can justify either one. You can say, well, it's for 100 years from now, let's enjoy it. Or you can say, the day of reckoning is at hand, beat the drum, get on a soapbox. I can't buy either of those attitudes personally. But if there's 1,000, and if 10% are at work, and if they recruit their number each year, and if 10% of the recruits also go to work, then it will take 70 years to harvest 1 million people. And then we'll have 100,000 salesmen. Then it will go faster. Compounding tends to build up. Then it will go faster.
Bill, I think our big spread is going to be the university. Fast spread.
Could be, Wilma. Could be.
Bill, I think our approach, you're talking about something I give a lot of thought to, is to young people.
Sure.
We don't have a chance to sell the older people with the younger people. I've had, in my time, being associated with this book, I've had 4 different observations in presentation. One was the sheer logic. The book is so sheer logic. The other is a reactionary. He reacts to the person's personality and adjusts himself to that personality and presents it in the manner he thinks they'd like to have it. The other is a good salesman. I've seen the party in action several times. I don't think it's salesmanship or choice of words. I think it's the exuberance he displays that incites their inquisitiveness. Area.
Palpable sincerity. I've used 2 approaches on the book. One is a long shot. I have on occasion been interviewing executives and technicians, and I find a fellow with a long religious motivation for test measurement, with a good sense of humor for test measurement, with a hell of a high IQ for test measurement, and he reacts. He's startled at his religious motivation, but he says, I can't understand that. I've never been interested in the church. And I say, well, now wait a minute. A religious motivation may or may not have an expression in church affiliation. In some cases, yes. In other cases, no. And if the conversation develops, I may send him a book right out of the blue. And this may just lie fallow, or it may click. I sent such a book to a TV technician in Dallas. I've seen this man once in the last 4 years. Bumped into me in the hall. He said, "Say, that was a terrific book you sent me." I said, "Glad you liked it. I've never had a chance to follow it up in fact. Our paths don't cross." Where I've done it deliberately, then I've done it only in one circumstance, where I was sure my friendship with that person would stand the stress of the Urantia book. And then I'll send it boldly if I think there's a sporting chance, just a sporting chance. Because I'm going to stress that relationship. This book looks a little bizarre the first time you look at it, let's face it. Who wrote it? Who wrote it? Who are these weird names? Bright morning stars, brilliant evening stars, archangels of all things. I'll never forget one vice president's reaction to the signature at the end of paper one. He read it to himself and he says, "My Lord, aren't we high and mighty?" I do urge you to take a middle road. Be not slothful, neither be frenzied, but do what you can do. Simply be alert to opportunity. Take advantage of it when you see it. And I think this. I think it's like in the super universe. If we're trustworthy, then I don't think the opportunity to serve will be long denied. If we're trustworthy, reasonably patient, and withal diligent, it's a nice mixture of diligence and patience, then I think opportunity will come upon us. And of course, if we want to increase our chances, we can go where opportunity is more apt to come upon us. We can always improve our chances. It's like the crazy accountant I talked to one time. He was a bachelor in his 30s. And I said, "Why aren't you married?" Well, he said, "What chance do I have? I'm traveling all the time." He said, "What kind of girls do you meet in bars and cocktail lounges?" Well, I said, "Do you belong to a church?" He said, "No." I said, "What church were you raised in?" And he told me. Well, I said, "Why don't you join the local chapter?" I happen to know the minister. And my friend called me up a couple days later. He said, "What kind of a screwball are you sending out here?" I said, "What do you mean?" I said, I asked him why he wanted to join the church. He says, "To meet women."
Logical.
Well, I said he wants to get married. You see, he's going to have a much better chance to meet the kind of a girl he might marry in a church than in a cocktail lounge. So what do we talk about?
Let me ask you one.
Shoot.
On peripheral paradise, what are these historical, prophetic, local universe displays for? We know they have a monument to him on the Darlington, one of the Darlingtons. What surface, or
What's the purpose?
purpose do they play, and what's it for?
I think it's for the same reason we have museums. We have museums so that in one place you can go and see a lot of things that you would otherwise have to travel all over the world to see. And
Concentrate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think on Peripheral Paradise, these historic prophetic exhibits are there for the same reason. You can go around and see dioramas, reproductions, and so on of what's going on all the way out here in time and space. And to me, it's very intriguing that they're prophetic exhibits as well as historical exhibits. They show the future of local universes as well as the past. See, paradise is outside of time.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see the prophetic exhibits of the local universe of Nebadon, wouldn't you?
Yes, sir.
And if we get there, I'm sure we'll be welcome. You see, you could anticipate your whole circuit of the 7 super universes. Let's say we're finalators on Paradise. And we haven't been assigned yet to a finality company. We've been admitted to the Corps, but we've given some time off to go around and look things over. I'd kind of like to make that circuit and see how do local universes in other super universes differ from the ones I'm familiar with, the Orvanton local universe. And they're in a relatively concentrated area, relatively concentrated. You could go around and get a preview. I think that this is there for the same reasons museums are here.
I had that topic assigned to me for a field further, and that come up. Somebody asked me the question, what are these for? I didn't have any answer.
Well, I think they're memorials to the local university. And I think they're there to gratify curiosity. I imagine the primary supernovae enjoy looking at them. They've never been in service out in time and space. This is an exhibit of what's going on out in time and space. I imagine Paradise visitors enjoy looking at them. Don't you imagine if you had been assigned to a certain sector, let's say in Super Universe number 1 with a finality company, you came back into Paradise, I would fancy you might like to go to the prophetic portions of these exhibits and see how this thing's going to work out. You see, they can prophesy because, well, you can't predict what one person's going to do any more than you can predict what one electron is going to do. When you deal with masses, then actuarial laws will apply, just as physical laws apply when we deal with large numbers of electrons, atoms, and molecules. And you can make the statement, God's will prevail. Now, you've got to take in a lot of generations and an awful lot of people. And it's inevitable. Because that which is contrary to his will is self-destroying. And that which is in accordance with his will is self-perpetuating. And that which works with the grain of the universe succeeds. And that which works across the grain of the universe does not succeed.
So how far ahead do you think they can foresee
From where?
when?
On Paradise, I think they knew all along.
Well, from you versa, let's say you versa.
Well, we know they knew.
Well,
We know that they knew at least 100 years ahead. Because the faithful of days, the Trinity ambassador of the constellation in which this system is located, smelled trouble 100 years before it broke out. Now, by reflective techniques, they may have smelled trouble even sooner. But we know the faithful of days had a hunch things were not right. I think they could have forecast trouble when Michael set up his design for Lenonendex, because he deliberately created them with a wider range of choice than was customary. He asked for trouble. Statistically, you could have predicted trouble with the Lenonendex in Abaddon, but you could have not statistically have predicted which Lenonendex. It's the difference between a physician and an actuary. You get a pain in your belly, you ask an actuary, are you in trouble? He'll ask you how old you are and tell you what the life expectancy of your age group is. And you don't want an actuary. You want a doctor who deals with you as an individual case, not as a member of an age group. Yes, Clay.
Bill, on the outer circuit of the lunar world, about 235 minutes more goes inward. If he traverses each of those 235 minutes before it goes from that circuit to the next.
I'm convinced he does, yes. Therefore, I think our traversal of Havana will take a long time. Let me ask you a practical question. If you had the physical vigor, the health, and the financial means, how long would you like to spend here on Earth just traveling, looking the planet over? You're well supplied with money. You have no health problems. You're physically vigorous now. Let's say you have the physique of a person 30. How long would you like to spend?
Me?
Huh?
I've got everything that's money, and I want to do all this.
Sure. How long would you like to spend working?
About 800 years.
Oh,
You could spend 100 years, couldn't you?
20. I
I
go
wouldn't
pretty
want to make
fast.
a dispensation.
I think I could do it. Time.
I hope before you went there, you took a year to learn the language. I suppose you went there and spent a year learning the language. And then you went around and saw the country. Sure you went.
Do
Sure
you
you went.
visit these buildings as you move in, or do you actually,
You live on each
do
one.
you have residence on these?
You have residence. And remember, there's nothing repetitious.
That's right, you're right.
Well, is this,
No matter how many of these worlds you've seen, you're completely unprepared for the next one.
I like surprise.
No, I would say this. Let's just say you're willing to spend 100 years. Well, if you're willing to spend 100 years on this world, it's going to take 100 billion years to go through Havana to do it justice.
But we won't have our charts covered on sale.
I think we will, Wilma, because this is an individual progression. I think within very reasonable limits. If you don't want to leave a world, I don't think you're going to have to, because you're not moving with a class.
Well, Bill, do you think that they will give us work to do on these different worlds?
Sure.
Well, that's the reason why I think they will dictate how long it's
I think it'll be a compromise between what we want and what they want. I think usually it is.
I have a question. If, who are the people who will go to the first preparatory 1,000 years of sleep, waiting for the...
Dispensational resurrection?
Who will they do? Us? We? These people?
You can't tell.
Well,
We know
Well,
this.
that's because
There are... Let's rule out a Jester fusion. I don't think any of us... Is anybody here conceited enough to feel he's going to fuse? That's a loaded question when I use the word conceited.
And then why then don't you ask, is anyone conceited enough to think that they're going to make the 3 days step over?
Now that's different, Wilma. I think this is more feasible.
You think it is? In this group?
Quite possibly, yes.
Bert?
Yes.
It's more feasible to do it, Bill.
No, it's my ambition.
when you rate personalities like Gandhi?
I don't know. I honestly don't know how Gandhi would be evaluated. I really don't. I think Gandhi's lopsided.
In what
Out of
respect?
balance.
He's out of balance. He's an idealist. I don't know. I have no opinion on Gandhi, except I question his balance.
Well, I think who I think needs to see that step over is possible.
Who?
George Washington Carver. I've just finished his autobiography.
Could be.
I mean,
If I had to make a bet, I'd rather bet on Carver than Gandhi. Fame has nothing to do with it. There's something about Gandhi that I question his balance.
You're saying then that to make this really simple, you have to be balanced.
a well
I suspect so. Here, when Gandhi preaches passive non-resistance and the Japanese are in Burma, what would you do if you were the British Viceroy of India? Exactly what Lord Wavell did. Throw him in the clink. That's right. Or let me put it this way. What would you do if someone of Gandhi's stature preached passive non-resistance when the Japanese held the west coast to the crest of the Rocky Mountains and you live in Denver? What would you do? Now, we can be a little more dispassionate evaluating Gandhi because our ox is not being gored. Gandhi stood for a great ideal. But Gandhi never had the wit or the wisdom to say, render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's. I don't know about Gandhi. My admiration for Gandhi is not unreserved. I have great admiration for the man, with certain reservations.
What are the qualifications of someone who would make that?
Well, the Blue Book gives some of them. I think you've grown in a balanced way. You've grown spiritually, intellectually, and you probably have made a contribution to your time and place. Jesus was not impractical. Jesus invented a new technique of boat building, incidentally. He made an engineering contribution to the technology of first century fishing techniques.
Material company.
Yes, Jesus was a very practical carpenter. I would suspect someone more like Gonad or Ganid. Get back to your question. When children are born into the world, and when they receive thought adjusters, they're grouped in groups of 1,000 for seraphic ministry. And if they mature in this broad sense that we've been discussing, they're put in successively smaller groups until finally they receive personal guardians. And if you have a personal guardian and you elect to survive, then you go over individually at the end of 3 days. This is my confessed ambition. I'd like to make that if I can. I don't think it's an unreasonable ambition. If you'd asked me to make book on it, I won't make a bet. Because where are we going to pay off, see? Now, at the other end of the line, at the end of each dispensation, the local universe authorities balance the planetary books. And everyone who is asleep is reawakened. This happened on our world when our planetary prince was assigned 500,000 years ago. It happened the second time when Adam came 37,000 years ago. It happened the third time when Jesus emerged from the tomb 1900 odd years ago. The fourth time, I don't know. That's in the future. At that time, the living and the dead pass through judgment. Now there are 2 other intermediate stages. If a group goes through an experience where the group itself has a value to the universe authorities, that group might be held together for further cooperation in the Morantia life. Such a resurrection took place when Adam died. You notice they let Eve sleep for 17 years until Adam died. Then they brought them along together with 1,000 odd veterans of the adventure of the first and second garden. And then every 1,000 years, they simply skim off a few. I think it's to keep some folks going through the mansion world all the time. That's a millennial resurrection. So I would say from a practical standpoint, we're going to get there by one of 4 methods. We'll either sleep until the next dispensation, and that won't mean a darn thing to us, whether we sleep 3 days or 300,000 years. Our next moment of consciousness in the resurrection halls of the first mansion world follows as of the next moment after our last consciousness here on earth. It's as though you napped for a moment or two. That's all we'll know. Or we may go at the end of 1,000 years. Or we may go as a part of some joint venture. Maybe this blue book will produce such a group. I don't know. Or we may go individually at the end of 3 days. That's our terrestrial escape.
Bill,
Right.
this line of conversation based on the question that was posed, and I have no answer for it. Immortal awakening, when I first mentioned, or becomes conscious of the past that he can become conscious of, and begins searching for friends, relatives, others. I suppose it's on his world. When will he be cognizant of whether they, whoever they might be, made it or did not?
You'll have to wait a long time to be sure. You'll have to wait until the next dispensation to be really sure.
That was my first answer. I mean, I knew I could get by a delay a long time by that, and further than that, I couldn't answer.
There's no other answer, Clyde. Until the planetary books have been developed.
This is not an ordinary person. I mean, this is an ordinary person, and you would surmise that, say they were resurrected at the end.
On the third day.
No. At the end of 1,000 years, or let's say at the end of a dispensation.
Well,
Then all the people they knew
he'd know for
should
sure
be
then.
there
Yeah.
on day one.
Yeah.
If they-
It's just going to take him a while to sort them out.
If he sorts them out and looks them over, and they're not there, and he came up to a dispensation, that's it.
He'll know or they may have gone on ahead.
Now, other than those who are 3 dayers, if he was a
Yes.
dispensation.
They may be 100,000 years ahead.
Yeah.
But he'll find
And
records.
far out into
Check
that.
passenger list.
He can check past passenger lists. Yes.
Won't we, if we realize that some of our loved ones didn't make it, won't we always have a feeling of grief or sadness or hurt?
For a long time. Yes.
Well, what you said a while ago about judgment, elaborate on that a little bit more.
We're told that we are judged. And we're told concerning the elements of judgment. First of all, they estimate what we could do in judging what we did do. Jesus implied a great differential when he told Peter, Peter, be a good shepherd. Feed my sheep. And when he told the Alphaeus twins, boys, go back to your fish nets. Be good fishermen. And remember, there is no such thing as secular labor. All he asked of the twins was that they be honest, law-abiding, kindly citizens. He asked Peter to be a shepherd. Of Peter, he asked much more than of the twins. But of each, he asked for all they had. Yes. That's the first question that comes up. The second question that comes up is, did this person make a decision? Was there time? I'm 54. I had a son who died at 19. I had a brother who died before his first birthday. Just take those 3 examples. We had different times. I'm sure 3 different answers would be given as concerns these 3 different personalities. And I'm sure that I would be expected to have arrived at much more in the way of a decision than my son or my brother. If there was no time or inadequate time, then judgment is suspended at this point. And the advancement of the individual to the mansion world is decreed. You see, they're fair. Everyone is given time, either here or there. Everyone must make this decision. Everyone must have time to make an undoubted choice, pro or con, concerning God. And if the first life did not provide that time, then additional time is provided on the mansion world. And if this were not true, this would not be fair. When you take this life all by itself, you cannot work out fairness. This life is not fair to people. Some get much better breaks than others in just the element of time. If there is enough time, then the next factor in judgment is this person in grace or not? And there, we're told that each of us has set to our credit, in terms of bookkeeping, a credit balance of mercy. It's described as a credit of lavish proportions, which is so great that no sincere person could ever exhaust that credit. I think the statement implies that an insincere person could exhaust that credit. Elsewhere, we're instructed that the keys of the kingdom are sincerity, sincerity, and more sincerity, and that all men have these keys. And I think based on this evidence, who are you? Did you have time? How did you use it? These are the principles on which the souls of men are judged. And the judges, in the final analysis, are the direct representatives of the Paradise Trinity in time and space. And again, you'll recall the statement. They say we do not claim absolute perfection in our judgments, because if there is any element of doubt, the judgment is always resolved in favor of the creature. If there is any seeming conflict between justice and mercy, mercy always exercises the veto.
Well, if we get that far, and yet we didn't do all that we were capable of doing,
Who has?
well,
Anyway,
then
I quote,
where
I
do we go
quote,
from there?
and Abraham believed faintly, and it was counted unto him for righteousness. That's in Genesis. That's also in the Blue Book.
Well, there's one thing I don't quite understand is, say we go from right here, we've all made our choice that we want to search for God. We want to get back to God. All right, then what, along the way, when it's sort of vague to me, whether we survive or not, I don't quite understand that. As long as we have that decision and have made that decision, how can we fail to keep on trying and going, getting there?
I don't think you can.
Well,
That's my considered opinion.
some of the, I don't know any specific instances, but where it says where they don't survive, it has left a little confusion in my mind where it says, well, we don't survive.
I don't think all persons are in quest of God.
Well, I don't either. And is it your idea that the only thing that can retard us or In other words, a person who doesn't want to find God is the only one who can't survive.
Certainly. Because I don't think all persons are in quest of God.
Well, I don't either. And is it your idea that the only thing that can retard us, or in other words, a person who doesn't want to find God is the only one who can't survive?
Certainly. Because God wants each of us.
Yes, that's right.
And again, as Paul aptly observed, if you want God, nothing can stop it.
Give us an example of the differences between the requisites now made on the 20th century Bantu chief, 56 years of age, and the president of a bank in Dallas, Texas.
Spiritually, no difference at all. The craving to worship. The Bantu may have abandoned the worship of a black idol in favor of the worship of the sun, as Andon felt that the sun was a superior object of worship as compared with fire. And they didn't call Andon idolatrous. They thought that was a pretty good distinction on his part. I think they'd expect more of the president of the bank in Dallas. I think they would consider his background, his circumstances. What experience did he have with the church? Was it good or bad? And again, you've got to consider human temperament. Let's say we've got a broad-minded, philosophical, thinking type individual who encounters an exceedingly narrow Christian theology and revolts against it. This is not necessarily a revolt against God. This is a revolt against certain man-made theological concepts. Did he progress? Was he sincere? Did he keep on questing for God? That to me is the answer. Did Ugwala or the president continue to quest for the hunger, the spiritual hunger in the human heart?
And if Ugwala tithe and payment was a concept now self-worship,
Yes.
as opposed to his
The mightiest thing he sees is the sun.
Phil, I think the last word you used just before pride, how do you say that? Question.
The quest for the spiritual hunger, the satisfaction of the spiritual hunger in the human heart. Certainly.
That's the key.
Certainly.
It's according to why you worship a thing.
Only the symbol you use is an unimportant.
That was,
You could be idolatrous.
therefore, I mean, what I was bringing in, that environment really had nothing to do.
It determines the channel of your expression. Yes.
The evidence of our quest is only to be found in the decision.
Yeah.
That
If
is
you're
the evidence.
sincere, and you'll do something about it. Yes. And that brings up the second great statement they make. As sincerity provides the key to the kingdom, so men make progress in the kingdom by decisions, and by more decisions. Which is to say, you show courage. Yes. Yes, you do something.
You not only have to believe, but you act on it.
You act on it, yes. You go in action.
That's evidence.
You see, the papers resolve the old problem of faith and works by saying, faith comes first and works follow.
So the decision is opposed to the idea with action.
Yes. You resolve the problem and do something about it. Example, if you wholeheartedly believe that God is your Father, logic, even though it may terrify you as it did gain it, Logic demands you recognize he's also the father of each other human being. And those who have a common father are brothers. And now you have a new concept of ethics and morality. You're doing business with your brothers. And you have to, it forces you to do business in a different way.
And the way you do business along that line of thinking is reflects the exterior space.
Yes. Now, you can get lopsided. You can say, all right, all men are my brothers. And you can be like the rabbi in Houston I read about. On his way home, if he saw anybody in need, he gave him his paycheck. Well, the temple had to take care of this. They mail his paycheck to his wife. And she gives him a little pocket money each day, which he probably will give away. See? I think the rabbi is warped. Again, I feel about the rabbi like I feel about Gandhi. I admire him with reservations. This man is not in balance. I believe that men are my brothers. But the social realization of the brotherhood of man is not a reality on earth at the present time. And if you doubt it, read the front page of any newspaper.
That's right.
This is a gray area of becoming. It will be here someday. And that's another way of saying the planet will someday be settled in light and life. During this interim time, I think we should separate our hopes and our expectations, so that when we meet a new human being, we should of course hope that he will react as a brother. But it takes two to consummate the brotherly relationship. And if he does not feel like a brother, you are not going to consummate the relationship of brotherhood. So you must never expect this person to act like a brother. Hope that he will, but don't be a fathead, a Pollyanna, and expecting to. Because if you meet enough people in life, you are going to meet your percentage of SOBs. And if you go trustingly and blindly into the relationship, you may be done in before you can protect yourself. Incidentally, if you do not qualify your hopes during an evolutionary period of imperfection, these hopes themselves may be shattered as you encounter the unbrotherly brother. I split my attitude toward my fellow men between high hopes and damned realistic expectations. And when I meet the occasional unbrotherly character, I am not shaken in the least. I just pull a shield over. I'm not going to attack him, but I'm not going to let him hurt me. And I just chuckle and say, well, we've only been out of the jungle a few thousand years, and civilization hasn't got to him yet. Yeah.
No, I think you'll just keep this brotherhood of man in mind as you read your newspapers and your magazines and so forth. I think there's a great wave of it going on right now, greater than ever in the history of this planet. This realization of brotherhood of man.
Sure.
I think we're
In all countries.
And remember this, it's the unbrotherly act that's newsworthy.
Yeah.
Please remember, the brotherly act is so common, it's not worth writing up in the news, except rarely.
But Bill, don't you think, being in possession of this book, we deal in a brotherly fashion on a broader latitude than we
Sure
did
we do.
before?
Certainly.
I know I do.
Certainly.
I think your illustration about a shield is a good thing because I'm so sick, sometimes I let it hurt me.
So maybe I'll be braver now.
Don't we all? Don't we all?
Let me offer you an intermediate stage of ethics, which is sub-spiritual. This is not in the Urantia book. Well, this is a part of my practical philosophy of life, and frankly, I got it from Arnold Toynbee. It's an adaptation of some of his comments. I'm not sure that I can return good for evil. But I think it's possible to avoid returning evil for evil. And I'd like to give you a good word to add to your vocabulary. The word is hubris. Hubris. And I first read it in Arnold Toynbee, and my next book was the Unabridged Dictionary. It's taken
I fell off the sled.
Hubris. Sometimes written Hybris. And it shouldn't be because there's no Y in Greek. I'm informed by Greek scholars. This is what the word means. It is a malevolent act which begets retaliation, which in turn begets counter-retaliation. And now you've got a Hatfield-McCoy feud going on.
Which in turn, yes.
Counter-retaliation. This is the story of Prussia. This is the story of Assyria. No matter how great and strong a person or a nation is, if they throw their weight around, sooner or later they cause the formation of a confederation of powers individually weaker but collectively stronger than they are. Those who live by the sword sooner or later die by the sword. Now, here's how I put it together, simply. Commit no hubris. Commit no hubris. No matter what's done to you, don't retaliate in kind. This, to me, is a level of ethical conduct which I cheerfully acknowledge is sub-spiritual.
Don't you think that the retaliation is a mark of the beast?
Yes,
Comes down to
but it's certainly super-animal. And if you can't return good for evil, and I can't always do it, I can at least commit no hubris. I can stop the vicious cycle right then and there. That's what I mean by putting the shield up. You do not strike back, but you do not let yourself be destroyed. This, to me, is practical ethics and morality in terms of an imperfect human being living in an imperfect society. This will work. I can practice this. I cannot always return good for evil, but I can always say to myself, Willie, commit no hubris. And I've said it many times. Commit no hubris. Do not lash back.
That's what the word means.
Mm-hmm. It's a vicious act, which outrages the person, so he's got to do you in, and then you've got to do him in. In the old days, what happened? He knocked you off. And then what happened? Your kids and nephews knocked him off. And then what happened? This is a feud. This is the Hatfield-McCoy feud. It's, yes.
All of us have pride in different degrees.
If we don't, we're in a bad way.
Well,
We have dilapidated
second
ego.
on my list of destruction of man is pride.
Yes.
My philosophy is that anybody should have sufficient pride to not be used or imposed upon to a certain degree. I heard talk for Winston Churchill after the First World War, and I consider him one of the greatest diplomat and statesmen of our time. And he says, pride is something I never could afford. Which I thought was a wonderful statement.
Mm-hmm.
There are many people who aren't that humble. That's the
Well, a big man can't afford to have it. Only to a certain degree.
I've heard that statement, a big man never feels big and a little man never feels little.
That's awfully good, Mini Man. I never heard it before.
That's good philosophy.
That's very good. Here's a thought I'd like to throw at you. In your dealings with your fellow men, try to be constructive. And this is the opposite of a do-gooder. A do-gooder actually chills me. I have a feeling I want to put maximum distance between myself and the do-gooder. Because implied in that statement is the fact that the do-gooder sits in judgment on me and tries to warp me into his image of what he thinks is good. Take people as they are and help them be the best thing which they can be. Example, in helping one's fellow men grow, don't veneer them, don't enamel them, just polish them. Bring out the best in their grain of wood. This to me is legitimate growth. To polish the grain of that person's character, personality, or whatnot. And you don't try to make them over into anybody's image. I find these words helpful to me. Try to be constructive in any dealing with your fellow man. If he's spiritually distraught and he's a Jew, maybe he should go back to the temple. Maybe you shouldn't tell him about the Urantia book at all. Help this man. Primarily, we're working for God. Secondarily, we're working for the blue book. But God always comes first. If he's a good Roman, maybe you should tell him to go make a confession to the priest. Now, if he's fed up with the priest, maybe you should tell him about the blue book, but use the judgment. How can you be the most constructive to this man? How can you help him to grow in the way which he is intended to grow? If you water cactus like roses, you might drown the animal out. And if you water roses like cactus, I'm pretty sure they'll wither. These plants require different amounts of water. People are going to grow in different ways. If his religion is tied up with rich, ornate symbolism, there's nothing wrong with symbolism. I'm not so sure the blue book is for him. I think he wants something gorgeous. And if he doesn't believe in the Pope, and he's a devout Catholic, I'd recommend High Church Episcopalian. It's something to recommend to him. Or Greek Orthodox. How can you help this man? How can you keep your own ego out of the picture and help him grow in the best way for him to grow? This is what I mean by make an effort to be constructive. You see, I hope we never become a sect. And to me, the difference between a sect and a brotherhood is, where do we put our first loyalties? Now, if this is my first loyalty, then I'm strictly sectarian. Because everybody I meet, I got to tell them about the blue book. This is my second loyalty. God is my first. And if I don't think this person is right for the blue book or in the market for it, and if he's hungry for God, I'll direct him. I'll try and help him find the best channel for him to find God. I'll send a Catholic back to the Roman Catholic Church, unless he's past the point of no return, in which event I got a prospect for the Blue Book. Would you folks buy that?
Yes, I do.
Then I think we work for the boss. We do not confuse means and ends. We do not confuse that which is value with that which has value. The book is a means to an end. This book is written, in my humble opinion, primarily to save men's souls, secondarily to illuminate their minds. This book is designed to bring men closer to God and to make God more real to men. And if this book is not the best means for that man at that time, then we should be as wise as serpents and direct and utilize the best means. Jesus never confused fact and truth. Was it Godiah at Joppa who asked him, did the big fish really swallow Jonah? And what a masterful job of teaching that was. Jesus never answered the question, because that fable was too important a part of Godiah's morality and religion. He talked all around the subject and illuminated the fact with greater truth. I'll never forget getting caught short in a fundamentalist group. I was talking about the personality of the human Jesus. And this thin-lipped theologian got up and said to me, Sadler, where do you stand on the position of the virgin birth? And there I am, right out in front of God and in the audience. And I can't answer that question. If I deny the virgin birth, I am seeming to deny the divinity of Christ. And if I say I believe in the virgin birth, I'm telling a lie right through my teeth. And I thought about what Jesus did in the temple when they put him on the spot with a loaded question. And they said, where do you get your authority to teach? And he answered with another question. He said, where did John get his authority? And John was dead, hence non-controversial. And if they couldn't say John went to the school of the rabbis, because he didn't. And if they said he didn't have authority, the mob would get mad. And if he said he got it from God, they would supply Jesus with the answer he wanted. So they said, we don't know. There's a time not to be naive. And my answer to this guy was, I don't have any feeling about it. It says in the good book, I said, that can you, by searching, find out the Almighty? And I said, I'm not in the least concerned with the mechanics of how he got here. I think the important thing is that he came and did and was what he did. Well, you can't argue with this one.
Well, how do you think I taught Sunday school lesson?
How'd you teach it, Wilma? Hello, Mary
I just
Catherine.
filled that lesson so full of everything else that nobody had a chance to bring up the virgin birth, because I knew that every person in that class believed it.
Sure.
And I just taught something.
You have no right to disturb them either.
I didn't tell them.
You have no right to disturb
Yes, the
them.
lesson was just full.
Sure.
I just thought of 45 minutes of other things.
Is it disturbing when you cause another person to think?
Well, you can cause a Catholic in a church.
Well, yeah.
You tell them that you don't believe in the virgin
Is it
birth.
appropriate?
Because
Are
they don't
you
know where you're at.
are you gaining or losing? I think I don't have the temerity to disturb the theology of a happy religionist. You see, I have no feeling of snatching brands from the burning. If he believes in God and doesn't eat pork, or thinks circumcision is important, or if he thinks eating fish on Friday is important, I don't think any of these things are particularly important. if he believes in God.
Don't detract from.
Yeah.
Add to.
Mm-hmm.
You see, we have a feeling here, which is so tolerant of so many things. I don't feel that I must, Lord, man, you've only been sprinkled. You've got to be dipped, or you can't make it. See, these things to me are inconsequential. If he's a good Buddhist, I think he's got just as good a chance of making it as any of us. What he calls God is not important.
Well, I think you learn tolerance from the
Mm-hmm.
I do too,
As it says near the end of this book, Jesus does not require his followers to believe in him or on him, but to believe with him in the Father. And you would expect this. Jesus was no egotist. He didn't set himself up as an obstacle to human belief. He set himself up as a means. Jesus never confused means with ends. He was not the end. He was the great means to the final end. Question?
How are we going to explain constructively the religion of Jesus and the religion about the religion of Jesus? His love and service, and the religion about Jesus is sacrifice and atonement.
J.B., I think Jesusonian theology will be worked out by the theologians of the future. We'll make a beginning. As we consider it, codify it, we'll start on it. The religion of Jesus is just that God is your Father, hence the Father of all men, of each man, therefore your brothers, and should conduct yourselves accordingly. That's his religion. And all the rest of it is what men have added to his religion. In my own theology, I've taken the only three statements that Jesus ever made about his Father. Clear-cut statements. God is a Father. God is love. God is Spirit. That's all he ever said. And in mathematics, you have a thing called the Cartesian coordinates. The X, the Y, and the Z axis. They're the fundamental assumptions of much of our mathematical system. And these are my Cartesian coordinates of theology. Anything which is consistent with these three statements about God, I will accept. And anything which is inconsistent with these three statements about God, I will reject. This is the fundamental of my personal theology about the Father. If God gets mad, out the window. If God is jealous, no. See, the religion of Jesus is too simple for people. They have to elaborate on it, you know. It's too challenging to people. They've got to dilute it and water it down. It's too unnerving to look so clearly at life and people. You've got to obscure it, overlay it with this and that and the other thing. Here, to me, is the problem. How do you feel this religion and stay practical? How do you surrender your human will to God's will and at the same time maintain good horse sense and good judgment in dealing with the temporal problems of life, where I don't think God is particularly concerned with how they come out. I made a call in Houston. I hope to get a nice account in the bank down there. I don't think the Universal Father particularly cares whether I get that account or don't. I'm on my own. I observed that Jesus never prayed that the family budget would be balanced after Joseph's death, but he worked. And I think if we remember that we're working on 3 levels of reality here in this world. We're dealing with things, meanings, and values. If we're dealing with things, we should be very scientific. We should use reason, mathematics, our brains. If we're dealing with values, I think we can be very trustful. We can exercise faith. And in the middle, we have meanings. And here we try to use logic. And we probably are pretty emotional about it. I suspect most of our logic is pretty adulterated with emotion. But where are you? What level are you in? Shall you use human judgment? Shall you have faith in God? Or are you in a mixed area? You've got to work out your own salvation, as Buddha said. There he's dead. This is how I think we grow in a non-lopsided way. And then growth is safe. As you pointed out, our whole civilization today is in jeopardy because our growth is lopsided. We have the tools of civilization in atomic power. We have yet to develop the ethics, the morality of civilization. And we're failing because we lack the spirituality of an advanced culture. If you grow spiritually, if you become more and more successful at rendering unto God the things which are God's, shall you any the less render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's? I say no. Unless, to quote Jesus, perchance Caesar should ask you to give him that which belongs to God. But today we don't do that anymore, do we?
Well, yes, the Russians are.
Ma'am?
Yes, the Russians are.
Quite right. Fascism and communism involve state worship. That's correct.
So don't you believe that when you pray for wisdom and understanding, and if it has to do with a material problem, say to pray for guide me to do the right way, do you still believe that you can receive that wisdom and understanding and guidance, or do you believe that the harder you work, the luckier you get?
Minnie Mae, we're in a gray area. There's no simple answer to that question. Look you. Prayer may be spiritual. It may be crass. It may be psychological, too. It may be all of these things. Or any combination. The Blue Book instructs me that sincere prayer effectively mobilizes your own human resources, if nothing else. So that the enhancement of wisdom which you may come up with may simply be a better mobilization of your own intellectual resources.
Yes, but where did I get my intellectual resources?
Well, let's not debate that one, because otherwise we're going to have God doing everything now. Practically speaking, they're yours, regardless of where they come from. I think this, I think prayer is good so long as you can pray sincerely. Any sincere prayer is a good prayer. If the ignorant human being prays for bread, I think this is a good prayer. I cannot pray for bread. In my philosophy, I must work for bread. I have the feeling God has equipped me well to cope with the material problems of this life, and I'm on my own. I think it's good to pray. And the only qualification is, can you pray sincerely? If the saint is pushed out of a 20th story window and he can sincerely pray all the way down, I think this is a good prayer. I don't think it will be answered in terms of any deceleration of a falling object in a field of gravity. You know that story they tell. I'm not going to bore you with the whole thing, but it's the unluckiest religious man who ever lived. And every deal that came up went sour. Even when he was, and he was always too late to retrieve. Even when he got into sheep raising in Australia, they suffered from radioactive poisoning, and he sold the sheep farm just before they found uranium on it, you know. And he's finally reduced. There are many episodes of the story that build it up. And he's finally reduced to the place where he's only got passage back to the United States. And so he books passage on a DC-7, and they take off from Sydney on the long Pacific flight. And he's a real Jonah. And first one motor gives out, and they're past the point of no return. Then the second motor gives out. When the third motor begins to cough, he goes up forward and talks to the captain and tells him about his life. And he said, obviously it's me. And he said, if you'll give me not one but 2 parachutes. He said, I'm unlucky. I want 2 parachutes, I'll jump out. And he said, this ship will make it safely. So they equip him with 2 parachutes and show him how these ripcords work. And as soon as he jumps up, the other 2 motors pick up, and he's falling. And he pulls one ripcord and it breaks. And he pulls the second ripcord and it breaks. And then he prays. He said, St. Francis, he said, I've done novenas to you all my life. In this hour of extremity, save me. And a great hand comes out of the cloud and picks him like a mote and holds him between thumb and index finger. And this mighty voice booms out of the firmament. Xavier or Assisi? And he answers, Xavier. Can you commit no hubris? Can you hope that the man is a brother, but not expect him to be? Can you be constructive in relation to your fellow men without being a do-gooder? Can you serve God primarily, using this book as a tool, and not just serve this book? If this book has to come into any of our work with our fellow men, then we're sectarians. And the last thing on earth this world needs is another sect. But if we can simply try to be constructive, work for the boss in the world, promote this book as needed, then I don't think we're another sect. We're a brotherhood. That to me is the vital distinction between a brotherhood and a sect.
Well, actually, Bill, of the manner in which we are to live as Christians is identical with the thing that the Master wrote about.
Sure. Or in the Jewish religion at its best, or in the Buddhist religion at its best, in any religion at its best. The best of any religion has no quarrel with the best in any other religion. God knows the worst can be pretty bad, even in the Christian religion. I'm sure you gals would not like to be subjected to the marital infidelity test that's prescribed in the Old Testament. Or have you read that section? It's mentioned in the Blue Book too, under marriage customs. And then can you live a balanced life? Can you avoid being lopsided? Can you have ideals without being an idealist? Can you be a realist who has ideals? I would define ideals as stars. I can think of nothing that are more useful for navigational purposes, but you can't get there from here in this lifetime. The idealist is the person who is sailing to the stars. The realist with ideals is the person who is navigating by the stars. Occasionally, you can promote an ideal into a plan for action. And to me, that is an advancement of an ideal. That's a promotion. You can put your ideal to work. The time has come when such a thing is it's feasible. Or you can make your ideal work in a limited way with this person and that person. Brotherhood is an ideal, but you can't work it universally. You can only try. Jesus lived up to his own admonition. He cast not his pearls before swine. And I'm so glad they tell the story of their trip down from the Swiss lakes when Gained got after him, and he says, "Rabbi, you aren't slipping, are you?" He said, "You didn't speak the words of comfort to this young Roman." And Jesus said, "He isn't in the market, Gained. He's not a prospect. You can't sell a person something. You can't sell food to a person who's not hungry. You've got to wait for him to get to be hungry."
Still getting back to virgin birth, too, it doesn't matter what you believe about it. If you're a good Christian,
No.
it's going to make you a virgin.
But in Christian theology,
What they want to about the virgin.
the heck of it, though, is in Christian theology, the virgin birth and the divinity of Christ are inextricably tied up in the same package. I was trying to talk to a chap in Dayton. We were contemplating the impending death of a mutual friend. And Danny asked me, he said, do you take the Christian view of Christ? That's a heck of a question. I said, yes and no. He says, you're hedging. I said, I have to hedge. I said, I think he was divine. I don't think he's a member of the Trinity. Well, I said, that doesn't make any sense. See? It's like imperfect, not natural, hence unreal.
That's like die, challenge,
Yeah. I think one of the best answers to that question was given by Jacques Weiss when he was talking to a Protestant theologian in France. Jacques is the Frenchman, the Protestant Frenchman who translated this book. A Protestant theologian in France. Jacques is the Frenchman, the Protestant Frenchman who translated this book. And this theologian said, who is Christ? In the Urantia book. He said he's not a son of God, he's a grandson of God. But he said he's of the family. And he said what he taught about God is reliable. And I think that's an excellent, quick answer. He's not God's son, he's his grandson. But he says he's a member of the family, and his pronouncements are reliable. You know, we haven't talked about this book. We've talked about the problems of living with the book.
Very
Good
interesting.
instruction now. Good instruction.
Listen, I don't think I'm telling you people anything you don't know or feel. I think I'm just putting it in words, that's all.
Well,
But
that's
you
true.
give us a basic view of application. As finite beings on this world, which I think is good. I think this is one of the most wonderful discussions we ever had today.
I have this feeling, J.B. We're told that health, sanity, and happiness result from the better unification of physical systems, mind systems, and spirit systems. And I think if this book should add to health, contribute to sanity, and tremendously augment human happiness. And all three should result.
Bill, what's your opinion on these people that do so much for other people but they don't take care of their health?
We only have one or two in our group.
I'm gonna move over there.
Well,
No, I don't do that, but Wilma does.
well, they're not in good balance.
What are you laughing about?
What was the third one you said?
Health, sanity, and
Add to
happiness.
health, contribute to sanity, and what was the?
Tremendously augment happiness, I suspect. I don't think any of us are in balance. But what we could do a better job. But I think this. If we can try and look at ourselves in the privacy of ourselves, we don't have to tell anybody else, except maybe our thought adjuster who lives in there and is the last being on earth that it would pay to try to kid. I mean, the adjuster, after all, he knows your gut. He knows your innermost being. There, I think, is where you can work out a better balance. Do you remember when Jesus was taught to say prayers when he was a little guy? And he conformed to all the rules and regulations, after which he insisted on having just a little talk with my Father in heaven. We could have little talks with our Father's representatives who live in each of us. I'm frankly abashed at the idea of talking to God. Now, I know he's got all the time in the world for me. He's got infinite time for each one of us. But just the idea of all that stuff that's encircled into paradise, you know, it's so formidable. But I'm not in the least abashed about talking to my thought adjuster, because I'm his only business here on earth.
You're speaking to God the same way.
Exactly.
The spark of God.
I find it easier to visualize communicating with God if I address the communication to my partner. That's the name I have for him, partner.
I can't, but I still can address God within me.
Certainly.
But I don't think of it as fellowship.
Who, I could care less about the difference.
Yeah.
It means nothing. It's just our feeling for it, that's all. And this is...
Do you visualize what that little thought adjuster looks like?
I don't know.
Good question.
I suppose I would symbolize the thought adjuster, Wilma, as I would God. Brightness in relation to relative darkness. I symbolize God as light in relation to the dark. I guess it'd make a good Zoroastrian. That was their symbol for God, too. I think it's a good symbol. It's appealed to many minds. The powers of light and the powers of darkness, you know, and evil. Yes, yes. I think it's a legitimate symbol.
Well, all divine personalities, when they have shown themselves, have always been bright.
Yes. The papers use it, spiritual illumination. Sure it is. Sure it is. I think it's a good symbol. It's not God, but I like it better than my childhood symbol for God, which was a glorification of my old man with a white beard. A very good child symbol for God. Very anthropomorphic, very satisfying to the child mind, but not so satisfying to the adult mind. It's your thought adjuster, I think, that can help you.
Bill, studying your anti-book and the Bible too, now I am so constantly aware of the revelations that have come through down through the years to people here on earth. It's fantastic when you think of it.
Yep.
But I never have seen the Bible in that respect before.
You read
Revelation has come to mean so much.
And Wilma, if you read other scriptures, you'll find it there too.
Other
Yes.
beliefs and all.
You won't find as higher percentage. The Bible has more gold nuggets in relation to the sand than any other book I've studied. But I found gold nuggets in every other set of scriptures I've read. Real truth. I don't find as high a percentage. I think the Bible is the best thing next to this book. But you can read the Tripitaka of Buddhism, or the Granth Sahib of Sikhism, or the Quran. You'll find stuff in there. Oh, the Tao Te King is tremendous, yes. Yeah. If you could add that to the Bible, it would be a worthy addition. I'll tell some of the old timers have told this story too, but I did this one time. I spent a day with a church up in Wisconsin. Minister asked me to come up, and I did the whole bit, the sermon, the matrons, the men, and the young people. It was a hard day's work. And I took and put a sermon together, and I took it from all the scriptures which were available to me in my library, except the Bible. I delved into the Quran, the Granth Sahib, the Tripitaka, the Tao Te King, the Bhagavad Gita in Hinduism, even a couple of the sayings of Confucius. Now, I gave myself only one editorial liberty. Whatever word they used for God, I translated to the word Lord, Almighty, God, or Father, whatever I thought was the most appropriate. And I read this from this Presbyterian pulpit. And afterwards, half the congregation came up and asked me where I got it. They knew darn good and well I wasn't capable of originating those things. And of course, I didn't spoil it. I didn't tell them. It was drawn exclusively from non-Jewish, non-Christian sources. But they recognized truth, and they heard truth that day. Going back to how do you work out a better balance? I think it's your thought adjuster. The evolution of man in miniature is a picture of the evolution of the whole finite universe. The Supreme Being is growing and evolving. And the Supreme Being depends on the absolute stability of the Paradise Trinity as his source of power and security. And the Trinity is not a person. And so are we dependent on this impersonal entity, this fragment of God that indwells us, and which provides a nucleus of absolute stability, a spiritual nucleus of utter, unqualified stability, around which we can fabricate the elements of character, temperament, moral nature, and spirituality, which constitute the evolving soul of man. Each of us, in miniature, is recapitulating the grand pattern of evolution in the grand universe. This thought adjuster, who is God within us, has no business here on earth except us. We are his exclusive problem. He knows all about us. He knew all about us. They forecast what we would be like when the gene pattern was established. Anytime after human conception, they could make this forecast. Because these people understand genes.
And then he was given a choice whether you wanted us or not.
Each of yours picked you individually. No, there are no draftees. I suppose somebody has to decide if there's more than one volunteer. But that doesn't take away from the fact that yours volunteered. Picked you, personally. And you're his only business. Now, the only catch in trying to talk to your adjuster is there's a great danger. There's more in there than the adjuster. You've got a subconscious mind. You can get all kinds of ideas that are new to your conscious mind, but don't necessarily originate in your adjuster. How can you essay to do this wisely? You know, at one point in Judaism, there's a, how's the Hebrew expression go? Beth qual, which means the Lord spoke to me saying. And this got to be quite popular. Every time anybody did any darn fool thing, the Lord spoke to them saying. Till the rabbis, who were pretty practical, simply outlawed this. They said there's going to be no more Beth qual, see? How can you try to talk to your adjuster without going haywire? Without becoming paranoidal, fanatical, or developing distinct screwball tendencies. You wake up in the morning, you had a heck of a problem, you got a solution. Aha, my adjuster gave me the solution to the problem. I think your subconscious mind solved that problem. There is one sure test you can apply. It's the test which Jesus recommended in solving for an unknown. He said, plant the seed and see what kind of fruit it bears. And if you think you have a seed of great price, of origin in your adjuster, and you want to test it for spiritual content, plant it. Be patient. If good fruit is born by that seed, good spiritual fruit, then in retrospect, looking back over a number of years, you might safely say, yes, the adjuster had something to do with it. Yes.
Is it the sixth cycle? Going in, or the sixth match in the world that we can talk to or talk about?
It's whenever we fuse, JB.
It's this world.
It's the fifth world on the average.
Well, I think, don't it say when we get to the sixth psychic circle?
Yes. Here on Earth. Or
Yeah. But we don't fuse with anything
No,
because we're not balanced.
that's right. You have some degree of communication.
Yeah.
Bill, you come to your sixth psychic circle.
Yeah. No, I haven't. Now, let me offer you this much testimony. This is all I can offer you because all I know is what goes on inside of me. I've talked to my partner many years. He has never replied. And I have never doubted that it was a dialogue. It's not his fault that I'm deaf. And I will say this, if he ever does reply, it's going to scare me out of 7 years' growth.
He doesn't have a voice, as you know a voice.
No.
The word thought adjuster explains that. He adjusts the thought.
I have never doubted that it was a dialogue. The mere fact that I can only hear what I've got to say doesn't trouble me in the least. I know he's there, I know he's listening, and I know he's doing something. What, I don't know, but I trust him implicitly. But again, don't be too sure of the answers. Going back again to Jesus' statement, he pointed out that human beings were very much like children in their unwisdom. They were going to ask for silly things. And you'll recall he said, which one of you, being a father, would give your child a stone when he asked for it simply because it chanced to resemble a loaf of bread? Or a water snake, which came up with a draft of fishes. So we may sincerely ask for things that are the last things on earth we should have. But our Father knows the thing we need and the thing we really mean. So many times, I think, when we get the answer to our request, we wouldn't recognize it.